Coded with Aalia, bringing you interviews with public figures and inspirational people speaking on self-improvement with empowering themes. And I'm your host, Aalia. Hello to the world. I hope you are well. I hope this episode finds you safe, happy, but also present. As you know, this is a very special season for us. For me personally, as an impact producer, some of the conversations we've had up to this point have just been so incredible. And I'm incredibly grateful for the people who are joining me in this initiative to humanize one another and really speak through our theme from Los Angeles to Gaza, a plea for humanity. I'm actually going to do something a little bit different. Sometimes I do these things, you guys know, those of you who have been with me for a long time. I'm going to read a poem because it's really going to start off this conversation in a way that I need to. And it's going to encapsulate what I kind of hope is the overall message of this episode, and particularly the conversation with my guest. Maya Angelou wrote a book called I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And for me, that book was transformational in my life. When I saw the title, I actually knew exactly what it meant. It resonated so profoundly with me. When I think today of the Palestinian plight, no words sum it up for me better than that itself. But I'd like to read you the poem that Maya Angelou wrote, and it is titled Caged Bird. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. We must find a way to understand the issue here that goes beyond what we think and what we know. And I'm always honored to share conversations with somebody who can offer a perspective even outside of my own. I want to take the time to understand the depth and give opportunity to others to reclaim a narrative that is both for the Jewish and the Palestinian people in this moment. Please give honor to the people that are coming on and sharing this heart with me, this heart for humanity. Jess Salomon is a Jewish-born and raised New York-based Canadian comedian and has hit many places, including The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. Jess fearlessly tackles dark, political, and sometimes even dirty topics with a lighthearted touch, and her comedic talents have taken her to prestigious festivals like Just for Laughs and the New York Comedy Festival, where she recorded her debut album, All the Best Choices. But Jess is more than just a comedian. She's also a gifted writer, having contributed to acclaimed shows like Baroness von Sketch and The Beaverton. And if that's not impressive enough, before her comedy career, Jess was a UN war crimes lawyer, a remarkable journey that we cannot wait to explore. Ladies and gentlemen, Jess Salomon. We're in the club right now, right?
All right, everyone, please take your seats. This is too much.
You moved in 2016 from the U.S. to New York.
That's where the title "All the Best Choices" came from at the time, because I moved from Canada with my Muslim wife right before Trump got elected.
Yes, audience, you heard that correctly. You heard she moved to the U.S. from Canada with her Muslim and additionally Palestinian wife,
and
right?
Palestinian.
Yes. I mean, tell me about that experience, whether it was from your Jewish community or the community. Like, what was that experience like for you?
My wife and I, we met when our families introduced us. That's my favorite cocktail joke. It doesn't work as well here, but when people are like, how did you guys meet? Our parents introduced us. They're like, no. I'm like, no, that's not how it happened. We met doing comedy in Montreal, and my wife, her name is Iman Al-Husseini. She was straight. Up until me. Thank you.
So
I converted her.
You at this, right? No, I mean, look, full disclosure to the audience, and I mean, I really have to say this. I've had friends who we've made jokes on their deathbed, and that's not a joke. That's like literally, I feel that humor is something we need. And honestly, with a lot of these heavy conversations, if you hear me laugh, it's because, you know what, God bless us for just laughing and taking a moment. Please
laugh.
Yes, please. So
I mean, our marriage is definitely a source of laughter and comedy for sure. And yeah, I think for us, she was a straight, like her entire act, her life, she was this straight single gal, she talked about being, I think at the time she talked about being Palestinian and Arab for sure, but it was a lot of, men, women jokes, the classic, this was years ago, in the comedy club, there wasn't, a lot of topics weren't really acceptable. So, I ended up, it caught me by surprise, our relationship happening. Iman was at the time bringing Muslim and Jewish comics together on the comedy scene to do a show called Kosher Jokes for the Holidays, because there seemed to be such a sort of like kinship between us, similar sensibility. And during Christmas time, something we had in common is that we didn't have much going on. So that was sort of like when we started spending more time together. And then we existed in comedy in the closet for a long time. My family, I think, was kind of like at first not super upset by the relationship, my parents, because I don't think they thought she'd ever come out. And I'd already been in one gay relationship, so I'd already kind of like broken their hearts in that way. And I think they just thought whatever ideas they had about Muslim girls and their parents, that like she would never do that to them, right. And what if maybe she would like get honor killed, or I don't know what, and so she didn't get honor killed. And then we got quite serious of that. That's when my I think my family, my parents had a hard time with it. This was 2014, and the bombing in Gaza, there was a huge bombardment in 2014 in like July, I want to say. And that's when, whenever that is happening in the background, it always raises tensions on my side with my family. So it kind of all came to a head, us like moving here or talking about moving here, getting serious, Iman coming out, a bombing in Gaza in 2014, me starting to post on social media about Israel. And I think that was sort of like, when I realized like, oh, this is a problem. And it's definitely that it's not that she's Muslim so much. It's definitely not the gay thing. So it has to be the Palestinian thing.
Wow. And how did that make you feel as a person who was obviously having this beautiful relationship with somebody that you're not probably even defining by a label right now? Not to say that we shouldn't honor who we are and the parts that make us up, but how did that make you feel, like from your perspective?
I mean, it's always difficult, like, when your parents and your partner, when there's tension there, and that happens. That's probably one of the most universal experiences, whether you could be two white Christian people that are, very on paper suited to each other. And for whatever reason, everybody hates your partner or you hate their parents or whatever it is. So I think that like in-law thing is pretty universal. People can be very liberal when it's not happening to them also.
Well said.
Like there was, I have to say, there were like definitely some like people, family, friends that were like, yeah, of course, like, like on board. And maybe even a little bit suggesting that my mom should be having an easier time when like all of their kids were married to Jewish guys, in straight Jewish relationships with people in finance. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like
we saw that with the black white. Like I came from a family that was like we don't have any problems with black people. Just don't marry one of our kids, right? Like it's like exactly to your point. And and thankfully, my family is at least the ones existing still have changed a lot of their mindset, largely because I grew up to challenge that. I grew up to challenge that ideology, right? And I think that's what it takes a bit. Going to segue into so what was your Jewish education growing up? You were from Canada, so obviously you had your experiences. You had the Shabbat dinners. You as you shared with us, or with me, I know beforehand, your family wasn't extremely religious. You did the high holidays and you did Jewish camp. But what was the extent of your Jewish education that really shaped your understanding of the world?
Well, Jewish education happens really young. So it's usually, over technically, at least what you're sort of put into as a kid. Anything after that is sort of your own personal exploration decision to study religion later, but usually ends at like 12, 13. So that was the age. I would say that I had I went to a school that was not, that was mostly Christian kids, but I had after school Jewish education, Hebrew class, one of which I remember super fondly in this woman named Mrs. Paris's basement. I think she was a frustrated wanted to be a Broadway star actress. And so she had some pipes on her and she'd always wear this teal sweatsuit. And she made the Jewish history sound really interesting. And it was a lot of sort of Bible stories, and we learned the songs and the prayers. And then the other, class I had at a different, I don't know what years, I think maybe later, after school at my synagogue. And that's where I got more of the Israel story, what I now recognize as the seeds of this Zionist narrative that I still see it coming up. I still see people making these same points. But what I'll say about Jewish education, because I just think maybe this is important to contextualize where the mindset comes from. We learn about the Holocaust when we're really young. I'll say that I wasn't tough, but I wasn't afraid of monsters or ghosts or the boogeyman because I had already learned about the Nazis, so it's very difficult to be scared of the boogeyman when you know about the Nazis. There's no there's no boogeyman memorial museum. No one's grandmother's gone missing on account of the boogeyman. Boogeyman, I think, is probably Jewish. I think Boogeyman I think it was Joshua Boogeyman. He made some poor life choices, but you learn about it. It's like the Holocaust is a lot to wrap your head around at any age, but when you're Jewish, you learn about it so young, and you kind of learn about it at the same time as you learn that you're Jewish. So your parents are like, Jess, there were these people that were called the Nazis, and what they wanted to do was get rid of all the Jews. And at the same time, they're like, oh, and by the way, you're Jewish. And you're like, what? This sucks,
Yeah.
Yeah, what they did was they had these camps that were just for murder. And this summer, we're going to send you to camp with just Jews. And you're like, are you even my real parents? Do you love me? What's happening? And that's sort of the setup, and then because it's Jewish education, you're sort of made to feel like you're the central victim in a horror movie. The next chapter is so this Holocaust happened. People, these Germans want to get rid of all the Jews, but luckily, we got our own country. We got this safe haven, a Jewish homeland. And then you take a breath and it feels and then it's but immediately we were attacked, and they haven't stopped attacking us. Nobody wants us to exist, and it's sort of set up in this way where, you're totally paralyzed from the Holocaust, education, and continuing, to go to Holocaust museums. Every nightmare I had was about the Nazis. It's so, and then there's just so many Holocaust movies, and I, interviewed Holocaust survivors in high school for a project that was, taking testimonials for the university genocide program. And that fear has been, weaponized over time, now with the whole apparatus that exists of anti-Semitism organizations that are, really well funded and have a lot of accounts online, and people follow them, and it just, all of it feeds into this this original fear that's very well based when you're a child, but that the answer to that is this country, and hopefully, this explains a little bit of the psychology of, outside of the sort of going through the Zionist talking points, you know.
Right. What divides us is an illusion. We're so much more alike. And when I think about my kids who also have like felt the target of, hey, right now, you know, I mean, obviously when Trump was, you know, you talk about 2016 and 2000, you know, people were trying to throw Muslims out the country. And I'm like, I've got Muslim children. To have to sit down and explain to them, maybe now is not a good time for you to tell people you're Muslim, just out of fear for their safety. Yeah. Did you, when it came to you and your wife's experiences, was there ever moments when you actually realized you both have been painted incorrectly and that those narratives have been robbed from you guys?
I mean, there were definitely certain points during the Trump presidency where we had different sort of red lines as to when we would go back to Canada. Because, I mean, the border is close to New York. We're from Montreal. It was always a possibility for us. The first thing was the idea of registering Muslims right before the Muslim ban. And that felt very familiar. Not that I had experienced that, but that was very early Holocaust, you know. So, and there were a lot of Jewish people who, you know, and including like the Anti-Defamation League, like on some issues will like really be out there for, you know, against discrimination against Muslim people, as long as it doesn't sort of like cross the line into like supporting Palestine. But at that time, they were also, a lot of Jewish people were like, well, I'm going to register as Muslim.
Right.
If you're going to start registering, and that was like one of the first things. And then it would turn to the ban. And then there were other moments of like real like anti-Semitic rhetoric from the government, from Trump, from this white supremacist, the Charlottesville, you know, like those were moments where I think, you know, Iman was like, oh, sorry, I shouldn't swear on this. This seems like a professional.
It's okay. No, it's unsugar-coated. You're allowed.
Oh, damn. Oh, no. Mon Dieu. Yeah. So there were times, yeah, I think that, you know, she's always had such an affinity. She loves, I mean, honestly, I feel like it verges on fetish for Jewish people and Jewish culture. And she sounds like Jewish. She jokes that she learned how to speak English watching Joy Behar on The View, who isn't Jewish, but Italians and Jews in New York, I don't know what it is here, but it's very hard to tell them apart sometimes. But yeah, I think, you know, I've seen upticks in anti-Semitism. Those moments for me, Charlottesville, I think was like a real, you know, that and the synagogue in Pittsburgh.
Right.
Those were big moments. And so, and then there's the general, you know, gay stuff that I guess hits both of us.
Right.
There was a moment with COVID in New York where, you know, where things were like really bad, really early on. And Mount Sinai had, I don't know if it was out of desperation or what, but they gave a contract for a tent hospital in Central Park to this evangelical group, and that were very Islamophobic and anti-gay. And, you know, that was for me was the breaking point of like, we're going back to Canada right now. Because I was like, you know, you're Muslim, I'm gay. And I was like, I mean, you're Muslim too, but like, it was like, so there's like the second, you know, the different identities and moments of panic, but certainly like, I don't experience anything like what she has. Because she's, you know, this moment now, I think for a lot of Arabs of a certain age, like, remember how it was after 9/11. Like for Iman, she grew up in the Middle East, and until she came to Canada when she was 10, she didn't really understand that people didn't like Arabs, because you're just like you're only amongst Arabs. And then came to Canada, experienced some discrimination, and then 9/11 happened, and it was very much like tell people that we're Cuban.
Right. Obviously, a lot is going on in the world right now. You have continued to be an advocate. You've definitely, used your platform to try to educate, and and as such, you've been. You've been called a Jew hater. You've been called a traitor to the Jewish community. I've learned a lot of German Nazi words for Jews that collaborated. Let's just say that I've had to put through Google Translate. Yeah. Oh, wow. With what, you had said something in our pre-conversation. You said people need to not be part of the problem. They need to be part of the solution. How, in your opinion, right now, is that something that they can actually accomplish? When a lot of them still have their heads in the sand, or they don't, like even anti-Semitic, I've had to consistently educate people to say, you realize Arabs are also Semites, like Palestinians are Semites. So it's not anti-Semitic to say, I just want Palestinians to have the right to freedom and integrity and some water and some food no differently than you and I have, right? So let me let you answer that.
Yeah, that is true. We are both Semites.
Yeah.
I wonder, and I'm just starting to think, I'm like, oh, is that why the anti-Semitism groups have been changing their names to like Jew hate? It's like all like hashtag. Well, if you haven't asked about the hostages, maybe it's Jew hate,
right?
So I don't know. Like now I'm starting. Maybe they've like heard that enough that.
Yeah, enough people are getting educated. They have to rebrand now. They have to rebrand.
Listen, they are there's nothing that they're not doing that's not branding. There's so much branding, and some of it's so embarrassing. Anyway, and really just cringy. There's a group called Jew Belong. I don't know. Just generally, they have these billboards that are terrible. But anyway, I digress. I did say I wanted to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I think just, challenge yourself to do the research, I guess, ask for resources. I think it's so important to hear from Palestinian people, to read Palestinian authors, to follow Palestinian journalists and voices. If you don't have Palestinian friends, write me. My handle's there. I think that's important. It's just to it's not so complicated, finding a solution is going to take time because there's so much distrust and so much division. And so in the most extreme people are in power, and there's a lot of interests around weapons that make a lot of money, resources. And, so there's a lot of, that's what's complicated. But what's not complicated is Palestinians cannot continue to exist under an occupation, under an apartheid regime, and certainly not under this kind of bombardment. Right now, I think it's try to get a ceasefire, to join a protest. They're honestly a very, very healing, wonderful experience. If you see anyone being shitty, shut it down, report them, whatever. Raise your voice, call your reps. I mean, a lot of us, like in New York, like a very blue place. A lot of times me writing or calling about abortion, or it's not going to it doesn't change so much. But on Israel, yeah, absolutely. I think just keep pounding them and
I don't know.
That's, I guess, my advice.
No, I love that. And I agree with you. And I mean, yes, crack open a book, open your internet.
Or some articles, yeah.
Yeah, search. You don't even have to go you don't even have to go to the library, but it's amazing how reading and opening yourself up to somebody else's perspective can really do something. And I find I kind of have that like bee charmer mentality to something. Don't get me wrong. I am definitely a type of person, don't start none, won't be none, right? Like, I mean, even when it comes to this conversation around Palestine, people often forget. There's an amazing documentary out there. Michael Ware produced it. It's called Only the Dead. But the completion of that is Only the Dead See the End of War. And it was an incredible documentary about Iraq, Baghdad, what it looked like before, what it looked like during. You got military personnel coming up to a business owner saying, shut down your store now. We think there's someone here. You don't have a right to provide for your family. We don't care. And if you don't do it, we're going to make you very uncomfortable, right? Because then you're suddenly in hot water. And I mean, I think about the American or our westernized world ideology. Let somebody show up on my doorstep and tell me, get out. No, right? Like, I think that it breaks.
Oh, you mean in the stand your ground country?
Yeah.
of
where's my gun? Where's my gun? I don't understand how people can suddenly, in the case of another person, feel that that's okay. And, in that, like, I genuinely, I consider myself a bee charmer in the good sense that my first reaction to conflict is, how can we de-escalate? How can we remind each other that, one, none of this really matters. If you die tomorrow, then we're all losing. There's so much more than this moment that we're experiencing. Maybe you're angry, maybe you're frustrated. All those emotions are valid. But at the end of the day, we should still see each other. Keep a mental acuity that you're still a person, you matter, and I might be feeling something right now, but that's just my feelings. That's not the situation. And, when I see people get started, in fact, we were at a football game, and I was shocker that at a football game, some people got a little rowdy, but there was a man with his son. This was I'm actually going to tell this really quick because it was the Giants Raiders game. And I don't know what happened, but the guy with his son, this guy just starts getting really aggressive. Now, the people I'm with, we're like, listen, we're all parents. We see this 7-8-year-old boy watching his dad get verbally assaulted. We all step in. We pull him back. I'm whispering in his ear, calm down. It's not, this is not worth it. Take a deep breath. And honestly, when I see things happen, that's my initial instinct because I want to make it better. I want people to see past the moment. And I think when you bring up the protests, when you go out and I'm not going to lie, Jess, I see the conflicts and I want to go stand next to one of the people holding an Israeli flag. And I want to go bring the Palestinian flag right next to it. I want to put my arm around them and I want to say, we don't have to feel like this. Aren't we better together than apart? And I feel that with that, there could be so much more healing, but instead there's a lot of criticalness. What has the protest experience been for you?
You're a better person than me. I'm like, escalate, and I'm going to win,
I mean,
I'm very argumentative, but this is like the law background. I mean, one of the things we talked about like very early was about interfaith, interracial dating. And I remember that being like one of my early arguments when my parents, I don't know, whatever age I was, starting to maybe date. And they started saying to me, that I should date somebody Jewish. And I was like, okay, what about an Ethiopian Jew? And I was like, they were like, and I got it. I found the protests. It's always, every experience I've had, it's just because you feel so desperate and like you're not doing anything. But sort of being online or doom scrolling, panicking, it's happened. There was obviously the Black Lives Matter movement, like protests that summer in 2020. And prior to that, I mean, the Women's March, it does make you feel, at least if there are a couple of things. It's connecting with other people, feeling like you're not alone in this. It makes you feel less crazy. It makes you feel like you're participating in something. It's a good way to sort of organize and meet other like-minded people. It's you get your steps in, fresh
you
air.
You get the steps in.
And I think, with respect to in this particular case, when early on I went to a Jewish rally that was in Grand Army Plaza, and then kind of went to Chuck Schumer's apartment. The videos and pictures I posted of that, like I had such an overwhelming amount of messages from Palestinians, from people in the Arab world, just like saying it was bringing them to tears. Like it's so meaningful in this particular case for people there to see that despite what the government is doing, despite the dehumanization, that people around the world, people in New York, Jewish people are standing up and saying that what's happening is unacceptable, that they're human beings and that every life matters. And I had no idea, like, I knew what it meant for me. I knew like it was important to do, but I didn't realize what those images, how life affirming it would be for people in Palestine, especially.
That feel like nobody cares, that feel that they're dispensable. I've been in that in 2006 with my own husband at the time. Now he's my ex-husband. So it's funny because I always tell him, like, I'm not his biggest fan, but in that moment, we're forever tied. And that experience will forever tie us because, of course, as a wife, I didn't want my husband to get killed, And even in the conversations today, I let people know, listen, I've never ran from a Hamas missile. I've never ran from an ISIS missile. I've never ran from a Hezbollah missile. But my family has run from Israeli missiles, unfortunately, and had to sit there and wonder if tonight was going to be the night. to feel that the world, and even at that time, I had to get on, I had to angle myself. Thankfully, I had enough media knowledge to know that the reason I could get the media to pay attention to me was because I said, but I'm an American family with a child, and my husband, he was Palestinian, but at that point he'd already gained American citizenship on his own before he married me. I know he did not marry me for citizenship. He was American before I met him. But that it's to feel like because we're Muslim or because we're Arab, suddenly it's okay, no big deal. And so right now, I think you're so right, the way that we're humanizing one another and standing up for another. And it's critical because you do have too many governments saying, well, our interests are what's most important right now. And mind you, I'm so glad that that's actually 14 were the one who 14 countries, including the US and the UK, that voted against the ceasefire and the UN vote. I mean, it's nice to know that over 100, countries said, no, this is wrong. But we still have a long way to go because, as we keep saying, and I want to remind everyone, if the ceasefire ends today, this is only the beginning. I'll just keep saying it. There's lives that have been destroyed. And I feel that as much effort is going to support the Jewish community or the Israeli communities should equally be going to Palestinians. Is it most important to you right now to kind of dispel a lot of what we see, which is these talking points about Zionism and the state of Israel and Palestinians aren't native? What right now are some of the most important myths for you to dispel as a person that's part of this community with your education, knowledge, and experience?
I mean, I started with sort of the classic talking points that you see a lot from Zionists, and sort of opened up my DMs to say, if anybody needs any help. I tried to focus a lot on international law because that's my background, despite the fact that, I kid you not, this guy came into the comments and was like, well, that's so nice that you just what a cool term, ethnic cleansing, that social justice warriors just came up with this woke term, for this conflict. I'm like, what are you talking about? Just absolute, it's no, this isn't a woke term. There's been, in terms of Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, these incidents here, there's a lot of people that jump on it. There's these, certainly on the Jewish side, there's a lot of organizations that solely work on basically blowing up anti-Semitism on campus as the gravest threat that exists. And they will spread misinformation before having a police report or, and so I'm just trying to hopefully this will help dial down some of the panic and fear and extremism online. But yes, focusing on arguments, basically. Now this thing that I just don't understand of if you ask for a ceasefire, that's somehow Jewish hate. That if you're asking for a ceasefire, you don't care about the hostages. I don't like these ideas that I see repeated, and I know other people do, right, that don't make sense to me. I try to that's what I kind of have been focusing on.
I mean, aside from the fact that you're this, amazing comedian with this very intriguing background, the fact that you were a UN criminal law attorney, and I went to law school too, also when I was younger, because I thought I was really good at arguing. That's so many people I know go to law because I was really good at debating, and I felt like I needed to be an attorney. But, there is human war crimes at large here. There is violations of international law. And traditionally, as we saw with the Holocaust, those people were held responsible. Now, we're not seeing that. How, when you put on your UN, law crimes attorney hat, what are the things that people really cannot deny, whether they want to or not? Really, what's the facts here?
So I think that most people that are genocide scholars that work in this area that are anyways able to speak freely, sometimes in the legal world you can't because it's sort of prejudices, maybe potential case or something. But academics who are experts in genocide, most of the UN agencies have either said that there's a genocide happening in Gaza. There's sort of different terms, but I, for me, from everything that I've seen, the case for genocide has been quite clearly made out. When Israel talks about its right to self-defense, technically that isn't true because it is an occupying power in Gaza, not in the sense of the occupation like the West Bank. For the purposes of international law, it exercises effective control of the territory, which qualifies it as an occupying power, meaning it doesn't have a right to self-defense. But that kind of talk about right to self-defense is like the area of international law that deals with, it's a Latin term, jus ad bellum, the legality of the aggression, of doing what you're doing, versus jus in bello, which is the laws that apply once this is happening. And so putting aside the self-defense, Israel's right to respond, how is it responding? Is it respecting the laws of war? Absolutely not. Also, Hamas did not respect the rules of war in the way that it attacked Israeli civilians, elderly people, women, children, civilians in general, and took hostages. Those are also war crimes.
And I also got to say, and audience, I'm not saying Hamas is right in any way, shape, or form, but resistance is born of these type of occupations, right? And I think a lot of people don't know history on the Jewish side. People have this perception that during the Holocaust, well, all the Jews just walked into the chambers innocently and took what happened to them. But in fact, and people can Google this, there were Jewish resistance groups that tried to stop what was happening to them. And they at times, and rightly so, felt vindicated to exert violence because there was an oppression, there was a dismissal of their human rights and their life, and the way that the language was often used. They were called human animals. There was the way that they were, they're the problem. That's what the Third Reich and Nazis.
Scapegoating and the dehumanization. Yeah, exactly.
And so when we see that happening from the Israeli leadership, it's very, very concerning. And to me, I hear, I'm curious about your thought on this, because a lot of times people are like, well, there's all these Arab countries around. Why don't they just get involved? And I mean, look, I do feel to some extent, while people can say they just don't want to be involved, or that, two things. People have said, oh, none of the Arabs are supporting Palestine. Wrong. I know my family, we have constantly sent humanitarian aid. We've donated to organizations that go in there and help. But also, nobody wants to mess with America. We all know what the big brother is behind, the state of Israel. Right. I think that people forget that knowing that if, let's just hypothetically, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan all they get their military and say, we're going to war. What do you think would be the outcome of that? And is it not right that they're a bit trepidatious in starting that type of offense?
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of the Arab countries, I think that they, for a very long time, have neglected on the diplomatic front, financial front. Agreed. There's a lot of, especially in recent years, the Gulf countries have a lot of wealth. And rather than make these side agreements with Jared Kushner and completely exclude the Palestinians, leave them behind, they have been pretty shitty in that way.
Agreed.
There's a lot that diplomatically the Arab countries could do to put their weight behind the Palestinian cause, and especially the ones that have a lot of money.
Right.
Militarily, I agree with you 100%. I mean, Israel is a nuclear power. It never said it before, but one of its ministers was like, I think we could mention dropping an atomic bomb. And everyone was like, well, I guess there's the admission of nuclear weapons, although it was pretty obvious. And obviously it has the U.S. in its back pocket. So no, I don't think there's anything they could do militarily. But the argument behind this idea of why don't the Arab countries do more? What's behind that is, why don't they just take the Palestinians?
Right.
And certainly they've taken a lot of Palestinians. But what that does is it's essentially, why don't they help us with our ethnic cleansing?
Right.
And on top of that, what it does, which is what Zionists do so much, is erase Palestinian people as a people. Mm-hmm. Because what you're saying is, but you're all Arabs. What's the difference?
Right.
So, so I think that, part of, you've probably seen this, these graphics or these memes where it's look, these are all, the Arabs have all this land, and, we're just the Jews. We just want this little piece. Yeah. Why can't we just have this little piece? We're colonized. We just have this little piece.
Yeah.
Why can't we have that little piece? Why does everyone hate it? So much, and we don't get the Holocaust, and that basically, it's but look at it's you're putting all Arabs as one group of people, which is just more erasure,
right?
And neglecting, if anyone has proven how important it is for them to be their culture, their nation on a piece of land. I mean, it's the Palestinian people.
Right.
You think the Jewish people, we will flee. Like, we will flee. And I don't think that's bad. That's just who we are, our history. And that's what we've been, and we're not necessarily tied, although some people are tied religiously to this piece of land now.
Right.
But for many years, it wasn't the case. So, people are just, they're like, well, we left and we packed up and we started new. Why don't these people, why are they still refugees? Like, they don't get it.
No, you're absolutely right. Because also I do distinguish the difference between the governments and the royal Saudis and, that they're driving around in their Bentleys and meanwhile let everyone else suffer. It doesn't matter. So I agree with you there. But I mean, there are people who care and have tried to, but with their limited resources, right?
Yes. And Eritrea, the Emirates are building a hospital in Gaza right now, I think, and Jordan dropped food in.
Right.
And Saudi will have to put the bill of rebuilding this, probably. I hope they will.
Yeah. Listen, we so appreciate your time, your voice, your effort. I know that there's so much we could have covered, but, in the meantime, where can people go? What's, your website, or how do you want them to support you for our listening audience as well?
Well, for me, I think, just follow me online. I'm on Twitter, Threads, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. It's Jess_Salomon, and I have a link tree. There you can sign up to a mailing list and watch I have some content there and show dates. And I just want to say there's a group. Can I shout out a?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So there's because of this, I think what's so important is Palestinians and Jews, or people, interfaith, Arabs, Jews, Muslims, working together at a grassroots level. This, I think, is where it's with this separation is just leads to othering and allows dehumanization to take hold. So there's one group in Israel that I have recently been following, and they're called @standing.together.movement. And it's Arabs and Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis who are working to bridge the gap between peoples and working towards peace there.
Amazing.
And over here, I just shout out to this. I really love this website. It's a lefty Jewish anti-Zionist website called Jewish Currents. So I would check that out.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, your voice. I look forward to continuing following your work, and everybody stay connected. Thank you so much, Jess. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me. This was such a pleasure.
Thank you. And to everyone else at home, thank you. It's a lot, but it's necessary. And I'm just going to close with this. If your version of heaven requires someone else to experience hell, then you're an oppressor. Simple and plain. I don't sit on any moral high ground, as I am a multicultural American, and with that, its own dark history of not really respecting other people's human rights. But I have a choice to make a difference, and I make that now every single day. And as a person who happens to have a part German background, in addition to all the ones that I have, I studied World War II quite intensely. And I was, as I've shared before, I was mystified by the amount of people that could blindly follow it and allow it to happen. And of course, years later, when the world's eyes were opened to their great misfortune that we all agreed it wasn't okay. So I'm asking you, what makes you think it's okay now? The truth is, it's not. And together we must continue to stand up, we must continue to raise our voices, and we must continue to fight for the liberation of all, including the Palestinians. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. And of course, thank you for letting us be unsugarcoated. Take care.